Welcome back, travelers, to Legendary Lore, where today we're going over Phyrexia. We're looking into a little facet of Phyrexia's storyline, specifically what takes place during the Brothers' War. What I mean by that is that we actually get a scene, a glimpse into what's going on during this whole deal. The name of the episode is Nemesis, which is really cool. That, again, is a reference to an older set. In this case, is referencing a moment when basically everything was taking place on Wrath. And we got to see what the Nemesis was doing. Nemesis, of course, referring to characters like Krovax and Valrath. And even right here, I can pull up this quote that starts at the beginning of the story. It's a quote from Krovax. "Blood is foul. The flesh dross. My ascendance thirsts for life itself." Because he was a vampire, but instead of being like a blood vampire, he actually would just absorb people's life energy from them. And then he would impale them because he felt like it. But the general idea was that was Krovax's whole deal. This is a fantastic story. Oh my gosh, it has some of my favorite characters in it. I'll just start reading it so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So essentially what we have is a moment where it's just Karn. Karn is on a porcelain surgery table, essentially, while Suture priests are literally tearing him apart. They're avoiding the giant axe that's been shoved into his chest. You have to remember that Ajani was completed. He did attack. He killed Jaya, and then he basically just shoved the entirety of the double-headed axe blade into Karn's chest, and the effect essentially stopped him from planeswalking. As you may remember, back when we were talking about the Phyrexians being in the caves of Koilos, Karn, when he was trapped in the rubble, he couldn't planeswalk then either. So the basic idea is that whatever they were working on, they perfected, and it was being used in the same fashion in that moment. And so Ajani basically had left that blade in him, and so he's basically just sitting there while they slowly dismantle him piece by piece. They're just tearing him apart, essentially. And to Tezzeret's watching this all unfold, and he's absolutely horrified. I mean, think about it. He's looking at one of the oldest planeswalkers that is still kicking, and he's just sitting there, taking it. He's thinking to himself, like, if Karn wanted to, couldn't he just get up and kill the things around him that are trying to do this to him? But no, he's just sitting there, and Karn is completely conscious of everything going on. He's just sitting there letting it happen. And what's crazy is that Tezzeret it shows Tezzeret here watching all these things happen, and as he's looking at all the different terrible things that Karn is going through, a little flash of a thought goes through his head. It says, "A perfect vision." And he says that he hates all of it. He hates the ideas that they have here. He hates the way that Elesh Norn is basically just this dogmatic creature-preacher kind of thing that is just like the people on Esper, the Seekers of Karmat, that were trying to push their ideals without actually giving anything of substance to him power-wise. Because again, Tezzeret, that's his whole deal. He does want perfection, but he wants it at his own, at the way he wants it. He wants it on his terms. He doesn't want to be a Phyrexian. He hates the Phyrexians in the way they are. So at the same time this happens, Ajani shows up, and just the things he says are so disconcerting. Because again, Ajani was a mentor of heroes. Ajani was a person who was steadfast and true. He was good. And here he's saying rebirth. The pains of destruction give way to glorious perfection. And it's just, Ajani disturbs Tezzeret to his core. Because one thing is the fact that Ajani is just preaching specifically from the Phyrexian teachings. They're called the Argent Etchings, which Elesh Norn apparently wrote for herself and everyone else so that they could see how great she was. But what's really awesome is that here it says, during the time when he'd served Nicol Bolas, there would be quiet periods when the Elder Dragon contemplated his next moves. Ajani was never left out of Bolas's plans. He'd devise special stratagems to occupy the Leonin while Bolas's other schemes progressed. That means that out of everyone that Bolas ever dealt with, including his brother, the one planeswalker that he thought about, the one thorn in his side that he anticipated, was Ajani. Because again, Ajani used that whole mirror soul magic thing during the Maelstrom to create a copy of Bolas that was able to defeat the Elder Dragon himself. And that whole deal, Bolas held on to that. He held on to that moment. He recognized that Ajani held exceptional power. And it's because of that that Joe's not here. You see, like I said in the last episode, Joe is currently on Phyrexia. He is trying to figure out what's going on. He said the Koth is doing fine, but that a certain power couple, they've been completed. But what we're seeing here is that they're completing these extremely powerful planeswalkers. We already have Tamiyo. Tamiyo was an extremely, extremely powerful planeswalker because of the way she could use stories to be able to actually cast catastrophic spells. And then Ajani, well, he's a leader. He's like a core soul of a group. He can get together an entire group. Gideon was already gone, so they didn't need to worry about him. They just got Ajani. He was the next best thing. So that means that they're taking planeswalkers that are extremely powerful, be it perhaps that they have particular powers of the mind, or that they might have some kind of magic based off of the landscape itself, or they could possibly be able to turn people to death with a mere look. Any of these things could be what causes somebody to become a Phyrexian planeswalker, because they have that level of power. And so that's why we're looking here. Ajani, who was basically the champion to defeat Bolas according to Bolas's own mind. Obviously, it was everyone working together. But Ajani, he knew not to overextend. He knew how to handle Bolas. He was a powerful planeswalker simply by existing. And so it says, and yet the Phyrexians have broken him easily. So easily, Tamiyo had been the first to undergo Jin-Kataxi's special completion process. And so basically all of that happened, and they just keep moving. And it says, let go of your memories and be reborn. These little like these italicized phrases keep echoing through Tezzeret's head. And so basically all of this is happening. Ajani is like talking to Tezzeret like, hey, you need to go see Elesh Norn now. And the thing is that Ajani talks with a lot of reverence for Elesh Norn, but Tezzeret really does not want to be there anymore. He's there for as long as he needs to be there, because we actually find out in this story what it is that he wants, why Tezzeret has been working with Elesh Norn this entire time, which is super cool. It's really cool. But essentially what happens is that as this is all taking place, there's an angel that shows up, like a Phyrexian angel. And Tezzeret's like, look, I don't want to do what you're telling me to do. And the angel's like, I'm going to help you. You are to bear witness, then you will receive what has been promised to you. And so inside of Tezzeret's chest is the planar bridge, right? And it's glowing red, and it's been corrupted ever since Phyrexian started going through it. And because of that, it actually feels more painful. It says that he has been, if not for periodic cauterizing in the Koldatha forges, he may have already succumbed to the gate's debilitating energies. So basically what's been happening is that Tezzeret has had this planar portal inside of his chest. Phyrexians have been basically entering into the portal, Praetors. And then in order to heal himself, he's been going into the Phyrexian, essentially the Phyrexians, like their furnace, to get retooled by the Phyrexians and get that all fixed and cauterized. So he's constantly in contact with the Phyrexians. It is worth noting that in the past, Bolas did give him basically an inoculation against the oil, but that was back before they knew how to Phyrexianize planeswalkers. Back when they needed to remove the soul to make you a Phyrexian. But now you keep the soul and you just become corrupted, which is what's really, really disconcerting for Tezzeret, because he doesn't really know if he's on even ground anymore. He doesn't know if he has that immunity anymore. And so as the story progresses, he just kind of starts walking through the Mycosynth, which is like this. It's just this very large span of conglomeration between the fleshy, spongy, mushroomy area and metal. And as he's going through, he basically starts moving towards the Panopticon. He's also at the same time delivering the Karn parts to Elesh Norn. He's been tasked with pushing this cart essentially of all these bits of dismantled Karnness to Elesh Norn. And so as this is taking place, he knocks out the angel that's there. He kills it and gets into, like, keeps going on his way. And I will just note, right before he departs from Ajani, there's a moment where it describes Ajani's white cloak. So Ajani still has Elspeth's cloak around him. And it says it's still stained with blood and soot from the events of Dominaria. And it's just so disturbing. Because Tezzeret, he picks it up And when he takes it, it says it hadn't registered with him until now. It was the same cloak once worn by Elspeth Tyrell. And it talks about how he knew that they were like friends, but he hadn't considered how they must have been so deeply connected. And he theorizes, he thinks that if he has that cloak, he must still on some level have a kinship with Elspeth. There must be a part of him that's still there, that's still good. And so he basically was like, okay, you know what? I'm not gonna deal with this. And then of course we have a moment of that whole italicized thing of make no mistakes. And so he goes through and he's working through everything, and here's another word: move ever forward. And he eventually gets to a point where he's able to ditch his guide, and he goes into the Panopticon. The Panopticon was basically a tower that was created by Memnarch. And it was it's a whole dark steel thing all over the place and everything. And by the way, dark steel is essentially the reason that Tezzeret is here. Dark steel is an extremely powerful artifact. Basically, it's kind of like adamantium kind of thing. It's just an extremely powerful, very, very indestructible piece of metal. And what he wants to do is basically make his body out of dark steel so that he can't be killed, essentially. He'll become immortal just by doing that. But obviously that requires him to work with the people who have Darksteel, which instead of Wakandans is Phyrexians in this case. So he's in a pretty bad spot. Now while he's in the Panopticon, he's able to see everything that the mirror can see. For anyone that's not aware, which is fair because Mirrodin was a long, long time ago, Memnarch, when he created the Panopticon, he created it with the intent of being able to basically survey everything around him all at once. And so in this, basically imagine just a tower with walls covered in screens. Each screen is connected to a different mirror, who is essentially a sentry able to tell what was going on, and he could get it in a moment. Now, obviously, that was meant for him as a way of harvesting sparks. This also happens to be Elishnor's one of her favorite places to be, just because she's able to basically see whatever she wants. So Tezzeret's in here, and he's trying to figure out what he can, but obviously, there are parts that are blind to him. He doesn't know where the Darksteel is being kept because there's parts that he can't actually see because he's being prevented. And that's where we get this really cool moment where all of this is happening, and then we have Karn responding. Here it is. And it says, forming a claw with his ethereal arm, he attempted to pry the doorway open, but the Darksteel resisted all attempts to bite into it to bend it. And he says, "This is madness." "It is," a voice called out, echoing off the metallic surfaces of the microsynth. "A vestige of the most treacherous madness." This is the moment where they're trying to go into the Panopticon, and he hears that voice. And Tezzeret's trying to figure out what's going on when he looks and he sees Karn's silvery eyes open. And he says, "Ah, father of machines, I'm strangely pleased your demise has been overstated." And he says, "I'm not pleased with any of these circumstances." And so he basically tries to tell him, you need to escape while you still have your mind. You can rebuild your body on another plane. And he says that because of the way they bonded the metal to him, he can't move. It's because he's tethered there. And so the slab that he's on is restraining his planeswalking. The axe is restraining his planeswalking. They have anti-planeswalker tech already, which kind of goes back to the idea of possibly the soul traps and how those were used to tether beings to Mirrodin back when it was still Mirrodin, and how that kind of thing works. And so Karn's basically trying to figure out why he wants to enter the Panopticon. That's when he finds out about everything going on. And Karn tells him that he just needs his head. It can be, because his head can be separated from his body. And so Tezzeret leans over and he grasps the side of his neck, and then he finds the actual buckle, and he unlatches it and he just takes off Karn's head. Now what's cool here is that by removing Karn's head on Phyrexia, it's mirroring what happened with Gerard and Urza, where Gerard cut off Urza's head in original Phyrexia, and how Urza during his last moments was just a head for a good chunk of time. It's why we have the card Urza Academy Headmaster and a lot of other head-based jokes with Urza. So here it continues on, and it talks about how essentially Karn is the best, he is the ultimate artificer. And it says that he had never given thought to the individual who created Karn. To have constructed such a being, his creator must have been someone of talent and import, not like his own father, a worthless dreg who manipulated Tezzeret into scrapping for Ethereum without sharing the profits. And so Tezzeret, he doesn't know the history of Urza. He didn't know the history of Phyrexia. He didn't know all that stuff, which explains why he was such a goon and worked with the Phyrexians the way he did, that he allowed himself to get as close as he did, as opposed to trying to fight them and defeat them naturally. No, he thought, oh, I can work with this, not knowing what was coming ahead of him. Because if he knew who Urza was, he would have known who Phyrexia was. It's just a really nice little touch. And so it says, don't be alarmed, Karn says. I'm redirecting the natural energy of the metal in your body to attune with the door. Only a few more moments. So basically, Karn is able to make it so the Tezzeret is able to enter the Panopticon. And while he's there, that's when he discovers all these things. There's the Dark Steel Eye, which was a whole deal. But that's basically how he was trying to see what was going on. And eventually, it says that the orders. Now, the things that Tezzeret does see is essentially an entire army of Phyrexians being created. And it's not the kind of army that he would be able to get through his chest, so he knows that they're not using him for that, which makes him even more worried. Because that was like his main thing he had over them, is that he could create these portals for them to go through. But no, not in this case. In this case, these are a different method. They're going to go across some other way, meaning that his little bit that he has over him won't exist anymore. He is not going to have that. Obviously, we know that's because of the whole thing that happened with Kaldheim, the city of Tybalt, and that whole thing going forward. But that's what we see here, is this really, really unsettling moment for our character where he realizes, oh no, they might not need me. And so Tezzeret is extremely upset because well, I can just say it here. Karn says, did you see what you desired? And Tezzeret says, I saw annihilation. The fate that awaits us all. Which Karn, of course, he's just the head. And he just tells him, the fate you helped construct. And Tezzeret's like, oh yeah, the fate I helped make? Well, I was there when the oil had you in its grip. You were babbling incoherently one second, ordering execution of mere prisoners the next. This is your fault. And Karn's like, yeah, you're right. I did. I believe that my responsibility, that the responsibility of all planeswalkers was to create, to welcome new voices into being. And I wanted Argentum, which is what Mirrodin used to be called, to be a refuge, free from war and pain. And Tezzeret says, war and pain, it's insatiable, it's unstoppable, and it'll find you no matter what. It has 1,000 names and 1,000 faces. And so that the Karn's like Nicol Bolas. And it's really cool because we get a moment where Tezzeret actually opens up a little bit. Yeah, Tezzeret's evil. Yeah, he's kind of insane. Yeah, he's basically Dr. Neocortex. But in this moment, he says, I hated him, you know? And he touches the horn tattoo on his head. You may notice that Tezzeret, he always shows up with these horn tattoos after his original design. And it says, he never let me forget the debt I owed to him, the life that he restored to me after Beleren left me a hollow, mindless shell. Let me officially thank you for ridding me of him. And so with that, Karn's like, well, it's like we didn't do it for you. The whole world was at stake. And he says, oh, father of machines, that is good. You know, after you left this plane, I returned to Bolas. He wanted to know if the Phyrexians had attained interplanar travel, and I told him the truth. They had not. But if they ever did, they'd be a force of chaos, a danger to any who would seek to rule. I suggested that your precious plane be eliminated before that happened. And to my surprise, he agreed. His first act as God Emperor would have been to obliterate New Phyrexia from existence. And in exchange, all we need to do is die, leaving everyone else to be his loyal subjects. It's so cool because we see that Bolas, he had his own idea of what he wanted his world to be like. If he was in complete control of it, he wanted to be in the best shape possible. Which is kind of twisted, but still, the fact that that's how Tezzeret's seeing things. And Tezzeret even goes further. He says, it's always so simple to you, all of you simpering fools pretending your hands are so clean. The shining heroes come to eradicate the foul, the profane, the evil. And it's just like this moment where Tezzeret's just done with all the sanctimonious nature of people trying to be the hero. You speak of our responsibilities. You could have taken responsibility for your choices, embraced your position as Lord over New Phyrexia. Surely it would have been better than the paradise promised by Elish Norn. Every day that I live is one more that I have fought for. Every breath I draw is one step closer to freedom, is what he wants to say. But in that moment, he hears the word come out of his mouth of completion. Ooh. Oh no. The moment where Tezzeret realizes, am I turning? Have I been infected? What's going on? And it says here, it goes through that whole thing we just talked about, of the question of, is he himself? Is he under Phyrexia's control? Is it too late for him? Has it already begun? Is that why he's on his way to Elesh Norn? Is Elesh Norn going to complete him? What's going to happen? And then he gets another streak through his brain. Skin is the prison of the blessed. And Karn tells him, you hear them, don't you? Pay attention, do not question, follow, become, and belong. He says, they're the same voices I heard when the oil had command of my heart. So Tezzeret is being corrupted. We are seeing that happen. Now, whether or not that's going to complete him entirely, we don't actually know. I expect, yes, it's going to be an epic Esper-colored Tezzeret Phyrexian Planeswalker, and I'm going to be like, oh, yes. But as it stands, this is what we're seeing in this moment where Karn is basically telling, like, you're changing. You're being turned. That's happening to you right now. And so it's absolutely insane. And at this, Tezzeret just goes, do you fear your own end? And he says, yes. I did all I could to prevent it, but it wasn't enough. And so basically Tezzeret says that he like, if anything happens to Karn, she'll suspect something's up. So he just puts the head back on the body and they go back to Elesh Norn. And so as they exit into this area, they meet the Mother of Machines. And so basically what happens is that as he gets there, he says, I've done as you asked. He pulls the cape off the piece of the Karn's body. And Elesh Norn's reaction is to say, Father. And so she goes over and she says, welcome to our great work. And she basically acts like very honorable, very respectful of all this stuff. And basically what happens is that Tezzeret is like, give me my reward now. I'm getting out now. Give it to me. And she says, oh, yes, your faithful service. You have shown us such grace, Tezzeret. We cannot have a realm breaker without you. And so he's standing there and he's thinking about the realm breaker. And obviously that's what they're going to use the armies for. And she says, we have decided that you shall be our herald on Dominaria. There remain interlopers on the plane scheming against us, planeswalkers of your acquaintance. You will lead the effort to enlighten them on the error of their ways. And so she's sending him to Dominaria. And he is not happy. He's like, this was supposed to be it. I've done everything you wanted. Give me my Darksteel now. And so basically what ends up happening is that before he leaves, Elesh Norn is over a reflecting pool, which is really cool. I hope we get to see a reflecting pool when we go to Phyrexia. And she says, do you truly have nothing to say, looking at Karn's head? After all this time, we are family after all. And then Karn speaks, and oh my gosh, Karn speaks. He says, Joyra. Jehoira is my friend, my best friend. We met in the original academy before the accident drove us from Teleria. She named me Karn, from an old Thran name. She said it meant, and then Elesh Norn just snaps at him and says, enough. And Tezzeret sees that and he's like, okay. He says, you're in a weakened position, but you remain on the board. So Karn is just ahead at this point because Elesh Norn took off the head and she's been like, it's now, that's all he's doing though. Anytime Karn speaks, it's just him reciting his old deal where he would remember when he only had the 20-year span memory cap on him, where he would remind himself that Joyra is his friend. And he had that connection with Jehoira, and he's using that as his tether to remain sane. And oh my gosh, it's such a great callback. Is it nostalgia? Yes, of course it's nostalgia, but I love it all the same. It's such a cool moment. And so that's essentially how this whole deal ends. Tezzeret goes back to everything happening, and he's and Shiv, and he basically chews out Rona. He defeats her because obviously he's a master of artifice, and he takes control of the entirety of the Dominarian forces. So Tezzeret's in control of Dominaria, essentially, as far as the Phyrexians are concerned, and there's, of course, a ton of sleepers. And so that's basically what we have here. He knows that he has to be patient. He knows he has to basically work as a spy. He has to send all these Phyrexian spies everywhere, and he's in complete control. But the thing is, he's in control of this area, and as long as he's in control of the Dominarian faction, he has his own pieces. He has his own stuff that he's in control of. And that's what he's really excited about, because he knows that maybe he can get more out of this than he anticipated. I love this story. That's why this one was taking up the entire episode. But that's how we're going to have to end this one before we go on to the last two side stories and then the big finale. Thank you guys for watching. It's been a ton of fun. I love this story. I'm so looking forward to what Phyrexia has in store for us. It's going to be fantastic. And until next time, travel well.